Seeing the Chancellor this close to the budget is rare.
Good morning.
But this is no ordinary budget.
Later this month, I would...
Facing her, a historic economic downgrade, and today the strongest hint yet that income taxes will be raised for the first time in 50 years.
There is a lot of speculation about the choices that I will make. I understand that. These are important choices that will shape the future of our country for years to come. I want people to understand the circumstances we are facing, the principles guiding my choices, and why I believe they will be the right choices for our country.
As the Chancellor talked, gilt yields started to fall, a win for Reeves given the £105 billion we're now spending on our debt. But by the afternoon, the price had gone up again.
It is my job to deal with the world as we find it, not the world that I might wish it to be.
The curious timing of the Chancellor's speech also led budget watchers to conclude an income tax hike is on the way, an explicit break in the government's manifesto promise.
We're in a very particular economic situation at the moment. She is faced as a Chancellor, manifesto aside, with low growth, really sticky inflation and a need to raise probably 25 billion of taxes. And that is simply very hard to do while sticking to the letter of all the promises that she's made. She didn't mention the tax lock today. She said that...
Will she break it then, do you think?
Well, what she said today was that she would put the national interest ahead of political expediency, something like that.
And in your judgment, does that mean she's breaking it?
That feels like a hint to me that she's thinking about certainly not being able to stick to the letter of the manifesto, which said she wouldn't raise the main rates of income tax, VAT or national insurance.
That hint has already given Kemi Badenoch a classic Tory attack line over tax.
The Chancellor's speech was one long waffle bomb. A laundry list of excuses. She blamed absolutely everybody else for her own choices, her own decisions, her own failures. She claims she will focus on the priorities of the British public. Whose priority is it to pay more tax?
The Chancellor is hoping to persuade financial markets to replace the current moron premium with a virtuous cycle, one where markets believe we've got enough fiscal headroom, where we've got enough taxation to cover spending, and where the Bank of England will cut interest rates faster to help with the cost of living crisis. But this political strategy is very high risk. The government is testing the ground with the market as well as voters, and the markets don't like tax pledges which bind the Chancellor's hands. And rebuilding financial credibility has been hard since the Truss era. And while there are global factors, the cost of UK borrowing looks bad even compared to France and Greece.
So there's definitely a possibility of a virtuous cycle where the Chancellor puts up taxes enough to rebuild her headroom. She perhaps also takes some specific measures, maybe on energy bills, that lower the rate of inflation. That might allow the Bank of England to cut interest rates faster. That benefits the economy, but it also benefits the government's debt interest bill directly.
So win-win-win, possibly.
Possibly, but what she'd have to do to get there is raise taxes by 20, 25, 30 billion. And so the question she'll be contemplating this week is whether the political cost of that is one she's prepared to pay.
Inside the Treasury, they'll be asking how much pain voters will be willing to take in order to right the economic picture and win over the markets. The price of getting that wrong will be disastrous, not just for this budget and the Chancellor, but for the government she helps lead.
Well, earlier I spoke to the economist Paul Johnson, who's also the Provost of Queen's College, Oxford, and formerly the Director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies. They warned before the last election that the political parties weren't being honest about taxes and spending. I began by asking him if he felt vindicated.
It's not nice to be proven right, but what we said before the last election was that there was what we called a conspiracy of silence, that none of the parties were talking about the tough choices that lay ahead. And we got some big spending rises and big tax rises in the budget last year. And then we got another promise that we wouldn't get any more tax rises, despite the fact that there was very little space for manoeuvre. Chancellor is coming back for more, and it's really hard to raise big amounts of money, which it looks like she might want, unless you're going to increase income tax, national insurance, or VAT.
And there she was this morning, rolling the pitch for misery, making us all feel a bit even more gloomy about this time of year than we need to. But she never once mentioned the T word, did she? What's the point of doing a speech like this without coming clean with the people who are going to have to pay the money?
Well, it was a peculiar speech in the sense that it didn't really tell us anything we didn't know. At least it didn't tell those of us who follow this kind of stuff anything that we didn't know. The government has backed down on a bunch of spending cuts that it was intending to do. It looks like the economic forecasts have got a little bit worse. So we kind of knew that there were going to be tax rises coming unless something gets pulled out of the hat. That's really all we learned today from what the Chancellor said. She gave us no clue really as to what those tax rises might be. I've never seen a sort of 3 weeks before a budget, a Chancellor coming out and giving a speech like that. So I think it was partly about softening up all of us for some nasty surprises or not surprises.
Was it a mistake?
I do think she's made mistakes. I think it was a mistake to promise that you wouldn't increase taxes before the last election. I think it was a mistake to leave so little space against her fiscal headroom in the budget last year. I think it was a mistake to promise not to raise taxes again, as she did after the budget last year, given all she knew at all of those moments about the difficulties she faced and the uncertainties in the economy.
Paul Johnson, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, joining me now from Westminster is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray. James Murray, thanks for coming on the programme.
Hi, good evening.
I listened to Rachel Reeves' speech very carefully this morning, and I kept thinking, I know what she's trying to communicate. She wants us all to feel, to prepare for the eventuality of raised taxes. So why on earth didn't she just call a spade a spade?
Well, what Rachel was doing this morning was not setting out the detail of the budget, because obviously that comes on November the 26th, but she was setting out the context for it and some of the challenges that we face as a government, that the country faces going into that budget. So she pointed to some of the global factors which have been hitting us over recent months, whether that's uncertainty over tariffs or global borrowing prices, as well as some of the deep-seated scars in the economy that the review by the Office of Budget Responsibility, the independent forecaster, is likely to point to around a mishandling of Brexit and austerity and so on. So
but these are all things that we knew about
decisions.
last year. I mean, even during the election last year, and certainly before the last budget, we knew about that laundry list of global problems. Whether it was Brexit or it was the eventuality of Trump getting into office and raising tariffs, which is something that he announced during the election campaign, or Vladimir Putin and the war in Ukraine. This was all stuff that we knew about. So you can't blame the past for what she has done in the present.
Well, look, we know that over the course of this year, there's been greater uncertainty, which has been rising as a result of instability around the world, and of course there's been pressures on global borrowing prices. Now, what the Office of Budget Responsibility is doing ahead of budget is looking at the supply side of the economy, so looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the economy in terms of productivity, and without prejudging what they're going to conclude, we think they're likely to point to the impact of austerity, the impact of badly handled Brexit, and the impact that might have had on the UK. And I think people intuitively know that some of these deep scars on our economy can't be fixed overnight, and we have to take them head on.
Right, but you made a very solemn promise during the election and during the last budget that you would not raise the three big taxes. In fact, when Rishi Sunak said that you would raise the taxes, you called him a liar. So what do you want people to think now? Because you're preparing them for those tax rises, aren't you?
Well, look, I'm not going to get into the hypothetical about what's actually going to be announced on the budget, because I'm talking about the context the Chancellor set out today. But what the Chancellor was very clear about was that she will take the right decisions for the country. Now, that might sometimes not always be the most popular decisions, and they might be difficult decisions, but they'll be the right decisions, and they'll be guided by the values of protecting the NHS, of improving the cost of living, and about getting the national debt down. And those are the values which will guide the decisions she takes.
Right, but we've all known about the context, the miserable context, for months now. if not years. So I just wonder why you're choosing to do this at the moment. It sounds as if you're trying us out for size to see how painful it might be when you do actually end up raising those taxes.
Well, no, because let me set some of the context for you. Because if you think about the budget last year, that was after we got into office and we saw what a mess the public finances were in. We took some difficult decisions, but the reason we did that was to stabilise the public finances and to get the NHS and other public services back on their feet. Going into this budget this year, we're being upfront, a few weeks ahead of budget, about some of the big challenges that we face as a country, and that's the context of those decisions.
Right, but you're not being upfront about what taxes you will have to raise. You're going to have to raise some of them. But you're not being upfront about it. I just wonder, having made the solemn promise that you made last year, if you then break that promise, and it looks as if you will, why would anyone trust you again?
Well, look, any decisions about taxation and spending, the normal stuff that you expect in a budget, comes in the budget. But let me just put to you this. Imagine the alternative to what the Chancellor has said today. Imagine that we were aware of the challenges and the difficulties that we face as a country, and we decided just to kick the can down the road and not address them and not take them head on. That would be unforgivable. And so what the Chancellor is saying is, look, there are these big challenges. We know they are going to be difficult to deal with, but we're going to take them head on. We're going to be upfront with people that they exist, and we're going to be straightforward and say, look, these are going to inform our decisions. We're taking a budget.
But again, you're still not being upfront. You could just say the phrase, we are going to have to raise taxes. We'll let you know which ones and for how much and when on the big day, on November the 26th. You're not even saying that.
I'm sorry, but I keep coming back to the point that any decisions about taxation, spending, all the normal stuff of budgets is for budget day itself on November the 26th. But going into these last 3 weeks ahead of budget day, there is a really important context for people to understand. And that's what the Chancellor was being upfront about this morning.
James Murray, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.